Hi, friends. I'm Andy Greene, and this week's episode is an unedited therapy session because this is the Naked Man Podcast. I started therapy in 2018 through Valley Community Counseling, a nonprofit organization that provides pay-what-you-can-afford therapy to clients, matching them with therapists in training. I started therapy because I caught myself in hypocrisy. I believed in therapy and thought it was helpful for anyone and everyone, yet I didn't think that I needed it, or was worthy of it, or any of the other litany of excuses that I made. As I developed a closer relationship with my anxiety and realized how deep it ran, I knew I couldn't wait any longer for help. With Lily and Blondie now in my life, there were higher stakes than I'd ever faced. It wasn't just me I was responsible for anymore. I wanted to better myself, to be curious about myself, not just for me, but for them. It hasn't always been easy. I met my current therapist, who understandably wishes to be kept anonymous, around Halloween 2019. It's not an exaggeration to say that she's probably one of the 5 most important people in my life. I love her. I've loved her like a wife, like a mistress, like a mother, like a daughter, like a sister, like a friend, like a mentor, like a therapist, like a human being. Not all of those feelings have been comfortable. Most of them haven't, but we've talked about them all, and she has always been understanding and there for me. And she was, again, on February 8th, 2022, when we recorded the following conversation. Not without trepidation from both corners. We've been talking about doing this, recording an episode of my therapy, for a while. And now, without further ado, without any edits, so get ready for long pauses and many a stammer from yours truly, I give you a session of my therapy. I hope you get something out of it, but I can't guarantee that. And fair warning, it's not always pretty, but guess what? It isn't supposed to be. Hello. Oh, you're on mute.
My apologies. Are we starting right away or are we?
I think we're in therapy.
Okay, great. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing okay. I guess I was thinking more about this one than I think obviously normal, and trying not to do that, even because it's like antithetical to therapy, or at least how I've sort of learned with like, because I'm like putting pressure on myself for this to be something. And then I'm like, wait, it shouldn't be any different than a normal one. And I like had that realization last week, but it was sort of harder to figure that out this week when we are doing it. I don't know.
Well, I wanted to ask you, is having it, and I was wondering whether to talk about what happened last week. And what I relayed to you, whether you wanted to bring that up today. One, because, I did originally, we had scheduled this for the week prior, and because I was not feeling well, we rescheduled, and whether that was dysregulating, and also the reason why, and the fact of me relating to you that I'm pregnant, and that at some point in time in the future, I'll be needing to take some time off, and there's a lot to unpack there, but whether that was something
right.
if anything, whether you wanted to address that, that's my first priority. Whether we're doing this or not is, after a revelation or a relation like that, I needed to check in with you about how you were feeling about that.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, there was sort of joy and relief when that happened. Relief of like, oh, I don't actually have to do this today. Okay. I think there was only like, I wish that I'd known that morning, so I didn't think about it the whole day, sort of a thing.
Sure.
But because that's just how my brain is in terms of things. Like it's sort of, and that's what I was today. I was like, the whole day I was sort of frozen and unable to, I didn't want to do anything really. and sort of, and knowing that there wasn't really anything I could do for this, in terms of preparation other than being me, or like, it's not even about being me so much as just talking to you. But in terms of I was really happy for you. And also like, there was no, aside from the timing of it, like being 15 minutes before our session or whatever, that was like, oh, but I was more like, oh, that's so cool. And exciting. And I didn't really go down the road of, oh no, in a few months, or, when you're going to have to take a leave of absence. I didn't really think about that too much. I feel like maybe I had already, I don't know, reconciled's the right word, but like sort of already knew that was going to happen, because I don't know. It just, that, let's say, because I'm like trying to make sure I'm not just like saying that to sound like I'm okay. The idea of like, oh, you being absent for however long doesn't necessarily strike me with fear in the same way that just this conversation right now does. Which is weird because it feels like today felt like my first therapy ever. Like it felt like I had to prepare. It felt like I needed to have something to say. And I was questioning myself though. I was like, what, there's no failure here. Sure. Or whatever. But I wanted it to be, but I also didn't want it to be performative either, of like, oh, I have.
Well, I think if I may, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but this is a very intimate, very kind of private experience that we have. And we've been working together for 2.5 years, Almost, and so yeah. There's something very precious about, the times that we have in being able to explore sharing that with other people can sort of seem like a violation in a way, or somehow unnatural, right? Because the whole idea of being able to be truly seen by an individual who you have trust with, and yet being able to be completely truthful and forthcoming without being metaphorically seen by society, right?
Right.
Is, well, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? If you have any.
I feel like I have a lot. Well, it sort of feels familiar because I think that's kind of it's like what I'm trying to sort of explore with, well, I guess, I mean, I don't really want to say this podcast because we are recording or whatever, but like that, the idea of, well, sharing this does feel, it is different. It is different. Like, and I guess owning that, maybe that's the truth, is that this does feel different to me. Even though I want it to not be. But yeah, there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, this is our secret time together. And is this like, it doesn't like, cause I have the power in the situation of like, oh, this was my idea. I wanted to do it. So it's sort of that classic Andy scenario. I feel like, of just like, oh, this is what you wanted. Here it is. And then you're like, fuck, is this what I wanted? But I think so. I think the pressure comes from like, wanting people to hear this and be sort of inspired to get help if they need it. Because even if I just sat here and said nothing for an hour, that was helpful.
We've done it before and we know how terrifying that can be, right?
That's the most terrifying. Yeah. But in terms of, it's like interesting. I kind of want to ask you the back to you in terms of like, well, cause I know we did have sort of, some qualms or some, maybe you were nervous about this too, in terms of what it could do in terms of our therapy relationship or whatever, like sharing it or, and obviously we're not using your name or anything like that, but there was obviously concerns on that side, too.
And I think, for me, the concern was an ethical one, making sure that I was staying along ethical guidelines, not only to protect you, but to protect my other clients. Right. Yeah. I've written or contributed to books in the past, and I've always had them be anonymous for that exact same reason. I think there is something and that's even going back to the pregnancy thing, not that I want to emphasize that, but that's always the balance of a therapist, right? Is being seen the authenticity of being seen as a real person, right? And having fallacies and all of those sort of things. The classic one is I used to smoke. I don't know if you remembered that, but I had quit smoking while we were working. At one point you stopped smelling it on me. Right. And so it's like this, how can someone who's supposed to be there to help me feel better, how can she be doing something that's self-sabotage? I digress. And now I lost my train of thought. That's what happens when you're recording. Let me just give me a second. So my fear was first and foremost, staying anonymous, but then still showing the authenticity of our sessions together. Right. Because I am inherently anonymous and a real human being at the same time. Right. And by that moment, right? Like I'm a therapist, but I lose my train of thought sometimes, right? Just like a regular person. And so my fear was first and foremost is harming you and harming that balance of that relationship that's so, that takes so much time to develop, trust and, first and foremost trust, right? And what that would mean to get feedback on this little world that we've created, if you did get any.
That's true. I really don't even think about like people coming out and being like, oh, that was a terrible, therapy session, or like, oh, your therapist like is bad. Like, I don't even think that would happen. But I suppose that could. But it's interesting, the fallacy thing. Cause sometimes I think just like any other human, if someone, you want to be patient with someone when they make a mistake, but like when there's been a time where like you were tired and I noticed, or like you're distracted or whatever, and those like frustrate me, but it is almost reassuring that you're not just a robot. And I think, and I guess everyone's different in terms of therapists and what, how much you share about your life with me and your clients and stuff like that. I always sort of, I think, appreciate any personal touch. Well, it's also just sort of like, oh, I understand. And here's proof because this is my life. That's kind of what you do. And that makes sense. That's just what everyone does. But yeah, part of me wants to jump into something because this is uncomfortable, but also I'm like, why is it uncomfortable? I think it's just because we're sort of in this like meta thing, talking about the thing.
We'll have faith that it'll bring itself into some sort of consensus, right? Like where we're at and what's going on with you. I think also there's a certain kind of format that we usually adhere to of like checking in, and that's not happened so far. So
that's true.
Perhaps there, and this is still your space to connect with whatever your anxieties are. So,
and that's the thing. This is my anxiety right now, which is kind of funny. Creating the anxiety through therapy, like normally it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So of course, it again just sort of makes me almost laugh and being like, oh yeah, I made this safe space slightly uncomfortable, but I think sometimes that's good, right? To be not, not to be, let's see, like reliant on, I don't know. We talked, I think, was it like the last time we had a therapy session that sort of like, maybe the need for shaking things up or refocusing, and maybe not that like it was stagnant or something, but sort of the need of like, oh, okay, this is, there needs not necessarily a change, but you know what I mean? Like we sort of felt like some of the stuff, although right now I'm like dealing with anxiety in the way that I was probably the first, year and two. So it's like, doesn't feel like in this moment that we needed to like move on to something else. But it sort of felt like, oh, this is sort of a new era of therapy and Andy. I was almost going to say your name, but yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's feel like that was a nice ramble. But I mean,
No.
but this is like what I feel like. I think the check-in normally is like you have a cat on your lap and where's Blondie? And then it's like, how am I feeling? And I think this is how I'm feeling, sort of like uncertain, but like,
well, I think what you had just mentioned, and maybe this would be something not only for us, but for our listeners, we had developed a unique situation where we both agreed it was best for our therapeutic process to be seen in person. And with the COVID and everything, we agreed to, because you're one of my more long-term clients and I trust you, we agreed to meet in a park near my home, right? Which is not necessarily conventional. And I know that's not this, the way that all therapists deal with it. But then, as you mentioned, like that there is still lately have been this process of a lot of it has been over Zoom, right? And we're over Zoom right now. And the idea of having the cats in the lap and that's not just an experience that you and I have shared, or nor just me and my patients, but I mean, it's completely changed the shape. COVID has completely changed the shape of therapy, for better or for worse. That's up for debate. So perhaps this feels weird, but not as weird as it could be, because there's the performative nature of not necessarily performing to a screen rather than, being that presence with that tangibility of the presence of another human being. So having this, I can see a microphone is sort of an extension of the computer screen, right?
Yeah.
It's today's new version of the computer screen.
Yeah, that's one. And it is sort of because there is this, I mean, intangible and tangible difference of being in person with you than like this. And I think we both sort of like prefer the in-person, out in nature thing, even if there's like distractions. I feel like we've gotten to stuff there, but I think it was just a shake up. Like it felt better because we were stuck inside for so long. Mm-hmm. So that was, and it's just sort of nice to see you. But yeah, that's because it does feel similar in terms of like that. There's like a slight artifice with Zoom in some way. And that's kind of what this is too. But like, I guess I want to talk about this anxiety that I feel, because it's sort of like, it's familiar, this place that I was in today. Because it was like, it made me hard to sort of want to do anything, but I also sort of was questioning everything. And I sort of felt like stuck, and it wasn't most of the time I wasn't actually thinking about this. It just was sort of this sort of on the shoulder, I think, feeling, or like it was, I've had this feeling enough where I know that's kind of maybe where the energy was coming from. Mm-hmm. But it had me, just questioning like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Cause I feel like I'm constantly explaining myself or trying to trick myself that like I have some sort of direction. It feels like I'm doing that, but then every so often, days like these where I'm just like, I'm almost like impatient for like there to be some sort of clarity or some sort of, I mean, I think it's a money thing too, because I think that's been coming up in couples therapy a little bit of like,
okay.
I mean, because I'm not making any money, and Lily is sort of bearing the brunt of our finances, and she has used the word unsustainable for her work, but also I think just for the situation, and I think that has sort of ratcheted up the pressure, or it's made me feel like I'm doing this wrong, even though that's not at all how it was framed. But it makes me more anxious to like, okay, I need to like make money. But whenever I think like that kills my spirit, really, or just like that pressure is maybe that's also the anxiety of this today, rather than, this me recording with you. But because I am starting a Patreon with my podcast and my other show and all that stuff. And I think
this is a new development, correct? I haven't heard of this.
I guess it's a new development, or at least it hasn't been. I haven't told you that it's like certain, but it like, I think even maybe when this is out, this is going to be part of, like, I'm going to be, I guess, asking for money, and that has brought with it, like, do I deserve that? And also the like privilege thing again of like, well, I have been living off of savings and I don't have a dire, like, I'm not going to end up homeless as someone who doesn't have money either gives me $5 or not. So it's just like, and then what am I doing where I would deserve money? And that's, I think, the money block. It's a block that I have that we've talked about, and it feels like I've gotten better, but I don't know that I have, I guess, or that I don't know that it still feels here. Or like any sort of feedback that I get in terms of what my ideas with it, it makes me question whether I do it or not. Like, it's almost like I'm charging friends. Cause I mean, realistically, the people that would know about it initially are friends and family. And it sort of feels like a way to dress up charity, like, oh, Andy needs money to do what he wants to do. And Andy's just doing whatever. He's having fun in his room. And I mean, yeah, that's negative talk about myself, but it still sort of feels somewhat true. And I don't like that. And I don't like asking for help or money. And that's kind of what it is, even though it's, I talked like with you, sort of the last couple months with doing the talk show made me feel like, oh, I do deserve money. I'm working really hard, but it's also like, yeah, well, it's sort of an intangible, like, how do I know that? In a lot of ways, it feels like a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of in a vacuum, or like, I don't know what value I'm sort of adding, and I know adding value, like, it's adding value to my life, I think. And I think that's probably the only thing that matters. But then when you ask for money, it sort of means like, it sort of makes that not true. Cause it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this for myself, but hey, please give me money.
And I can relate into that in the fact that I think we both enjoy what we do. And I think, both being an artist and a therapist, there's a certain amount of guilt, and maybe weirdly societal perception that it's not okay to ask for money, or it's not okay to ask for money when it's something that you do enjoy, right? Because it's sort of this idea of, is it truly providing a service, right?
Right. I'm not fixing anyone's plumbing right now, or maybe I am, maybe this is helping someone's brain. That would be nice. Hopefully it's helping mine.
It's not a definitive.
Right. No, it's, well, and that's, I mean, I suppose if I was, it's a lot of Patreons and things are about like a product, like I'm making a book, like please, or like I'm making a film, please fund, like help me make this thing. And so that does have an end product. And I suppose mine does in terms of, well, there's a podcast, there's a talk show, but for some reason that doesn't feel the same. And part of it, yeah, I don't know. It just, I guess it's just an extension of anytime I'm asked like what I'm doing with my life, or who, or even like, who am I? That's what it feels like. This is like attempting to answer, or like, and that's impossible in some way, or it just doesn't feel.
Do you mind if we break it down, just make it a little simpler?
Of course.
When you talk about this anxiety, I know that previously it had always been more of a mental rather than a physical phenomenon. Was that correct? Do you find, like today, just not looking in a general sense, but just today, how can you talk to me more specifically how that anxiety manifested for you?
It was sort of, I mean, it's this blah feeling kind of a thing. And also sort of like, I mean, there's fear in it. And I sort of felt, I mean, I had a really wonderful morning with Blondie, who I haven't been with for 2 weeks. And so we just cuddled and, had 20 minutes in bed of like just petting. And I woke up before my alarm. So that was really nice. But then I was sort of in dread of when the alarm would go, to like make me start whatever I was supposed to do today. And like I had sort of plans, but they sort of all, when I got up, it was like, I sort of just felt like a question mark, like, oh, none of this matters. Like, or none of this is, I need to do today, which in some ways is a good thing. Cause like, there wasn't anything pressing, like, oh, something's due today, it was really, this is the thing that I had to like do. But in terms of like my body, and I will say I probably had a little bit more coffee than normal. And I feel like that sort of, like kind of snapped it into my body, or at least I felt it more, because of that.
You mean it made it more of a physical, tangible?
Yeah. Like I felt it in my body a little bit. And I mean, I did try, I like went outside a little bit, but then like I was even, my plan was to go for a hike after this. Like I felt like I would feel free and good doing that after. But then this whole day I was sort of like, I don't want to do I don't even want to do that. I don't want to go outside. I just want to, I was thinking I wanted to have a gummy and relax. That's what I was thinking. And then I was like, I don't want to, like, that's not, I mean, that's what I was looking forward to. It was sort of like, that would be the end, like when I'm done, I can have a gummy and have fun. And it's like, why can't I just have fun or do whatever I want right now? Even though, and that's like kind of what I've been doing to a certain extent, but it just feels like maybe every so often I forget how to trust myself. I mean, you talked about trust, but it was just sort of felt like I didn't trust myself to do anything today. And I mean, I did, or I didn't know what to do.
Well, maybe the gummy needed to still be maintained as a reward system. Otherwise, what does that mean if it's just a freely sought after feeling, right? Without any, because that's sort of the idea you were talking about. Why do I get to, have this reward of doing what I love without having any tangible product or money? When we say product, like money coming in, right? So I don't know if that's truly how I wanted to articulate that, but I'll see how you take it, and then perhaps I might need to adjust.
Well, I mean, there is something about a reward or something like that, but I also sort of feel like that's not exactly, I don't want to think like that with it either. Like where it's like, oh, I only deserve this when I've done something, or it's like a reward for a job well done or whatever. It's more of,
well, I'm not saying that. Okay, let me clarify. I was not saying that necessarily it's a value judgment of good or bad, whether it's a reward or not, but whether there's something within you that needs to feel like I can only have a reward when I've done something to deserve it. Or I can only do what I love when I've made enough money to support my family. Or I can only have this gummy when I've endured the anxiety and finished this process. And then I can, get high and relax and not feel the pain anymore.
That is a good clarification. Something about that feels right. Like, or sort of like, oh, I have to feel miserable, or endure something like, I feel like I lost it, but that was, like there is something there in terms of like feeling, I think like feeling like I have to deserve it or do something particularly well or something before I can actually relax and have fun, or even just feel good about myself. I don't know, like have fun is not necessarily the right thing too, but yeah, it sort of felt like I had to be in my own sort of prison for a little bit, and then I can let myself out once I've done the thing that I'm supposed to do, even though this is a thing that I was excited about. And it always is with stuff like that, with like, baseball, softball.
Thing that's so funny.
What?
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking the baseball.
Yeah.
Situation.
Yep, for sure. Well, because I mean, the way I love baseball is like real, but then it's somehow, and that's like part of somehow that love then becomes painful, or maybe that's the same. There's, that's why it's painful. It's like, cause you make a mistake or you do something.
Well, it's sort of the idea of I'm not allowed to do baseball if there's not a result that's favorable to, well, interesting. Does it need to be favorable to yourself, or does it have to be favorable to others? Does that make sense? So like,
right. Well, baseball, yeah, there's a team thing. Well, and even I think with any of the art stuff, it's like, obviously it's for, the outside world or whatever. Like it's, or that's the hope, that it sort of, is seen or read or whatever, experienced by someone else. But like, I think that's part of, for sure, with baseball, because there was like more responsibility or more fear because there's other people, or there's a responsibility to like live up to them, and not necessarily their expectations, but maybe my expectations of myself, which I think are higher than the expectations of other people, maybe.
And if I may interrupt, I would argue that the only time you allow yourself to be present and to enjoy the process of anything, or just being in the moment of it, is when you are on a gummy.
I mean, not always, but it's certainly, it's like training wheels. It's like bumpers where I like, all of a sudden I don't worry about what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually like working, by the way. Like I normally am just like now doing 8 hours of stuff that it was clear that was what I wanted to do. And I'm like having fun with it. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like, and once I've had a gummy, I don't actually feel guilty either, like of taking it, or like, oh, this is bad, like I'm cheating or something. It's just like, oh, I'm just now present doing the things that I want to do. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like I think I'm able to do that without it but like, it does feel, it's certainly harder. And I think I think it's been easier once I had the meds too. And I like once I had anxiety meds, and I'm not sure if that just sort of like helped I guess it's the ruminating thing, or just like, but for this, I wasn't like thinking about what we were going to talk about really. Like it was just sort of this, I think my anxiety, or what I do, I think what I'm like learning is that it becomes this impossible task that I can't prepare for, rather than preparing for it and being ready as one can be for, whether it's a baseball game or a shoot, like a film shoot or something like that. It sort of cripples me or like the Stowe Fellowship. Like I was like, oh, clearly I could be more ready for this, but it sort of became like, oh, and sometimes I think I tricked myself saying like, oh, I could, there's nothing to prepare for, or like, I'm better if I just don't prepare. And then this one's a little bit confusing, because therapy, I do think there is something like, I didn't want to have a script about what I was going to say, or I just wanted to be in the moment. But it's actually one of those things, like when you talk about being in the moment, are you in the moment? I feel like you sort of, because I was just thinking, is like, wait, maybe we're present right now. But then me saying that now feels like I'm like watching me say that. But yeah, it's the kid thing where, playing with toys in my room or in the bathtub for 3 hours, that was the most present I feel like I've ever been. And that's sort of what I am when I'm creating and I'm not thinking about anything else, or like it's the play thing. But it kind of feels like I forget how to do that, or to like get to that brain, or to allow myself to. It feels like I don't deserve it, and there's actually something maybe like asking for money or putting money to it puts more pressure on it to be like, oh, I have to do this now. There's a very, like, it's actually a tangible amount of money or whatever it is, even if it's $12, $300, that would feel like the same amount of pressure to me, I think. I mean, neither of those are enough to live off of, but whatever. I think it would sort of, I guess I am worried that will like sort of take the fun out. Cause I think that's, or like, I mean, I think I've had that experience before, where it's like, oh, and I don't, but obviously that, I'm trying to like know if I've ever like truly had fun making money. And I don't think that is true. I think I've like had jobs where I've been able to have fun or skate by and just sort of like exist. And that was at the time okay. So yeah, it does feel like it will change it, or it will now. But also, it's all hypothetical. Like nobody's gonna, like, part of the other thing is like, I don't want to know how little, like, I feel like I'm always opening myself up for people to, well, I'm doing it in the way that I know how, which is, in terms of like social media, it's a very small amount of people or like a small audience. And sometimes that's like on purpose, like I'm holding myself back. But I mean, social media, it's like, I'm trying, I really am. But part of the fear is like to know what the dollar sign is attached to the people, like, and knowing like the friends or whatever they're going to give that money to, and also making judgments on that. Like, I don't want to make any judgments on people, because like, I can't give $5 to everyone that I like and care about. So it's like this weird, just the whole thing makes me uncomfortable. Even though like, I know I have to do it. Like I have to make the option open, basically, rather than being a wall and operating behind the wall and complaining that I'm not making any money. I don't know. Even though I know there's this, and then I'm having like the privilege demon on my side being like, oh yeah, you get to have that worry or judgment about it, rather than just like, most people don't get to, try and like save themselves for work that they care about. They just have to work to survive. And I think that's another reason. Yeah.
Isn't that what you are doing by asking for $5, $12? Is you're doing what you need to do to survive, just maybe not in a conventional way.
I guess so. Like, I think there's something like, I want to believe that, because that would make me feel better. I don't know. There's a certain like, arrogance to, or not arrogance, but like, I'm too good to have a day job or something to actually pay rent while I'm also doing this. And, I've tried to do that for a lot of my life and hated that too.
We'll talk about privilege. There are, people in this town who have financial backing from either parents or.
Well, I mean, I kind of do right now. Like so like I know I'm not, I was going to say Joe Millionaire, which is like the first reality show I ever watched. But I don't come from, like it's not a nepotism thing, or like I'm not Steven Spielberg's son or whatever. But I definitely am not here with no net. And in a way, it sort of feels like the only way to like ask for $5 is if I have no net.
But isn't it, really actually, if I were to reframe, I'm trying to figure out a way to honor how you're feeling, and it's still the same way, maybe rechange the narrative. So when you received this, sum of money from, family, you could have invested that. You could have just spent it, right? Or you could have invested it in a variety of different ways. You could have put a down payment on a house, right? You did, I believe, put it towards some bills and some financial loans that you and your wife had.
Right, student loans.
Right. But also a big way of by, having this be your primary source of income or sustainability, you really invested in your career, right? Because the reality is it is very difficult, right? For some people, for a lot of people, to go after their dreams and put all the effort and time that it is required into creating a future, and at the same time work the 9-to-5 that helps pay the bills, right? And so, yes, it's a luxury, and we can talk about privilege and honoring that and accepting that. But still, at the same time, like acknowledging that it wasn't something that you're asking these people to pay back to you that didn't require a lot of thought and effort on your part, right? So does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. And I mean, yeah, it's
sort of like you're offering them, if it's for a business, right? And you're saying, I invested in a coffee shop and now I'm providing coffee and I want people to pay for this coffee because I need to make my money back so that I can, get out of the red and start making it prosperous, right?
Right.
You think twice of it. I maybe you would. And then maybe the question is, would you? That's more what my question. Would you think, would it still be something difficult for you? And in that case, that's something that's part of your psyche of being worthy of XYZ. We can fill in the blank. Or is it because of the type of good that you're providing that causes the anxiety of worthiness?
I think it's both, but I think it certainly would be easier for me if I was like running a tangible business. But I guess at the same time, like, I mean, I did start an LLC, like, to recognizing that I, am a business, or like, that's how I need to think about it. And that this is to follow what I want to do. I have to I have to make money based on the way the economy, like what our society is. And so, yeah, but like, if I was just, doing a brewery or a coffee shop, that would sort of feel slightly more tangible. And I think the disconnect is sort of that, like, in some ways, to be who I am, to be an artist, I have to pretend every day that I know what I'm doing. And I don't know what I'm doing. And some days I feel like I do. Some days I'm like, oh yeah, and those are the best days. But it's more days like this where I'm just like, God, I'm fumbling in the dark, and I have to, whenever I'm explaining myself to people, it becomes clear to me that I don't know what I'm doing, or it's like, or like there's some sort of, expectation that I should have some sort of master plan or something and there isn't one. And I know that, but it feels like there needs to be. And it's sort of like I'm tricking myself. And then when I'm asking for money, it's like I'm tricking other people. And I don't want to trick other people, but I also know that I'm not that person, that I'm not like going to take money and not do anything. But there's also no, the things that I'm doing, there's no pot of gold at the rainbow, like certain, and that's the thing where I'm like talking in couples therapy of like, it's so hard because I feel terrible. Like Lily I don't think she'd quit my job or her job if I was just, writing Transformers 6 right now. Like but she might, so, and part of that then is like, fuck, I need to write Transformers 6, or like, why can't I write Transformers 6? And that's just came to mind, whatever. But like, and it's not that easy because I totally would write Transformers 6 if someone was like, hi, we'll give you, but I guess it's still that, like, it doesn't feel like I'm doing enough, or I'm doing the right thing. And I'm doing quotes because I do know that there's not a right thing. And like, it's sort of, I feel like today feels like a step back in terms of like going back into those things that we've talked about a lot. But clearly they're still there. And I mean, yeah, it's not quite just the imposter syndrome thing either, though. It's just like, I don't want validation based on money from other people. There's something about that feels like, oh, I am an artist because 12 people gave me $5. That's not 0 people, 400 people. That shouldn't matter. So, but I know it will affect my psyche based on, the response to it. Cause I'll just be like, oh, like, it'll be like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Or, oh, I'm still, not there yet, or whatever it is, the narrative that I've had my whole life. And it was interesting. I don't know, are we out of time?
Let me check. We have a few more minutes, so we should start wrapping it up, and then we'll do our closing process.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because when we brought it up in couples therapy, Jay, I'll call her Jay, she sort of asked about high school. She asked about my teenage self and sort of was getting some vibe about, well, in terms of the money thing. And part of it is this like sort of rebelling against the man, the system sort of a thing, which again is like coming from there is a privilege thing in there too. And I think we could spend 4 hours. We've already spent hundreds of hours talking about it, but it sort of feels like it's mostly in a circle. Or like I feel good and then I remember, reasons to feel bad. But what it made me think of was being in high school and being at the lunch table by myself, which was a thing. It was sort of like 1 to 4 people would be at the lunch table kind of for most of my high school lunches, and kind of, I just sort of lived on the periphery by choice. I was like uncomfortable with, high school, but with myself, and didn't know who I was or who I wanted to be. But it was also like, I just didn't connect to people. Like the only way I connected with people were online, where it felt like I could be myself. And I don't know why that came in. I know why it came in terms of, there's some sort of popularity contest almost about, if I'm finding, using Patreon or using social media or something. And there's something to the validation of being an artist too, of like, oh, I'm appreciated. They're sitting at my lunch table now. And I don't know if I still feel like that boy, who basically felt less than, but also better than at the same time. Like, oh, I'm not one of these assholes that only cares about like there's only 3 things to talk about: girls, boys, and like homework, or, like sports, like that was sort of it. And I just didn't, I don't know. This feels like sort of, I'm going far afield and not closing up, but it just like, I wanted to bring that to you because it felt like there was something more there. That because it felt like, oh yeah, it does feel like I'm sort of still 14-year-old Andy. Well, I'm still, 6-year-old Andy too. I'm all the Andys.
Well, I always think that's interesting to realize when we have some sort of anxiety or some sort of thought that disturbs us, is like what voice or what age is speaking to us at that moment. And I think also what you're alluding to, which is important to remember in therapy in general, is that like we brought up a lot of stuff today, right? And there's a lot of direction that it goes. And sometimes we absorb half of it. Sometimes we absorb a teeny itsy bits of it, but like that's where the continuation of it is, right? And sometimes it's not always the same conversation, but if it's significant, it'll come up in another way, right? So maybe like today's session didn't have like a nice little neat bow on the end of it, which definitely can cause like some catharsis and some, sometimes the thing that people seek after in therapy, some sort of closure and how they're feeling. But that's the reality that's not always an option, right? And
that would be if therapy was a movie.
Right.
Which,
and it's a series, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to acknowledge that. And so we have a lot to talk about next week. But my question that I always ask at the end, what are you going to do for self-care this week?
Well, I mean, nothing. Like I don't mean like doing nothing for self-care. I mean like, allow myself to do nothing. Because I think I only allowed myself the last 45 minutes before this to listen to your playlist and just lay on the bed. And I still felt anxious and nervous, but I think I even fell asleep. Like, I don't know. I can't be that nervous if I'm doing that. But
could be my music choices. They were pretty lulling to sleep.
Except for the tick tick boom one that you put in for me, I guess.
I did. I put it in for you. Yeah. I really appreciated you sending me that. For the audience members, we send each other songs from periodically, which I totally condone in therapy. I think that's great. I think that's a great way because we express ourselves in different ways, right?
Right. Well, and it does sort of humanize it too. It's like, oh yeah. Well, we're sharing emotions through song and not actually saying anything. I don't know. That's why music is so great. But yeah, for self-care, I mean, I like want to hike, but also don't, but that's a classic thing. So, I think I probably will go outside, go for a walk, and put on music, and that'll be my
recommendation.
Please.
I have found in my own personal research and what's been working for me is I take a walk, even if it's like a 20-minute walk around the park, very first thing in the morning before I have my coffee. I literally, in my pajamas, put my tennis shoes on, make sure the sun is on my face, and I look ridiculous, I'm sure. But the whole idea is just like getting out before I even have time to think. And I find that really helpful. And then waiting to have coffee until at least an hour into my day. I don't know that's slightly different, and we can talk about the source of some of this new findings of mine. But this idea of taking for a walk, I'm always a big proponent of exercise and endorphins, but that idea of not even thinking about it and just getting up and just walk around the block. It doesn't have to be significant in that regard.
Right.
Just, being out of the house to start your day, I find very helpful for me personally, and I'm recommending it to my clients. So I'll recommend it to you.
Well, so that's what you're doing for self-care this week.
That's what I'm doing for self-care these days. Yes, because I'm struggling with nausea. And so, eating a little bit throughout the day and drinking lots of ginger ale, but also, that's what has been really helpful for me, because with my own anxiety, right, will create is sort of, oh, I can't do my job. I'm a failure. I'm a fake, I'm missing sessions, the whole 15 minutes before our session. I really wanted to have our session, but.
Well, I know, I recognize that was why it was so late. It was that you were trying to pull through.
I really was. I really was, Randy.
I appreciate that. That's what and that's why I wasn't like actually mad or whatever. And I sort of was like, okay, this will happen when it happens.
We digress. But no, definitely, I think your instincts are right on. And it doesn't have to be, what else? Like, what's something that can be not as foreboding, that actually, the idea of, going for a hike, it feels great at the time, but it also can feel quite burdensome. Is there something else, like a favorite coffee drink, or,
I've had enough coffee today. I mean, a part of me is like, oh, I just want that edible, but it's like, no, that's not, I mean, that does still feel like there's more there in terms of like whether it feels like a reward or now I deserve it now. But that also came to mind, and I want to make sure I say it out loud rather than hold it, because I don't know.
It's allowing yourself to take the edible, which, we can talk about, addiction is very complicated, but allowing yourself to take the edible while acknowledging your feelings around it. Remember, we talk about it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. Right. So these feelings behind, do I deserve the edible? Is that somehow a nefarious notion to have, say, isn't that interesting? Right. And not having that negative self-talk about it, which will then ruin your high. Right. But a
little bit. Yeah.
A little bit, but also just isn't helpful in the long run. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's more of just a desire to not be thinking and to be, present. That's what it is. Which is a different feeling or desire than like having a drink. I think it's like, it feels more like, just relax, Andy, have fun, and it's something that and I know it works, but I think so does exercise. So, I'm going to try the waking up thing, because I did try going outside first thing and like get the sun on, and just being outside, like sitting and just like having that, and not like the phone be the first light that you see and all that stuff. Then it got cold and other things changed, but it's not that cold, so I can do that again. And Blondie likes it. So, I'll try all those different things. Always trying. Thank you for doing this. And, yeah.
Yeah. My pleasure.
Well, I guess I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Whew. I'm so grateful to my therapist for joining me and trusting me and being willing to share this sacred space with you all to end the first season of the Naked Man podcast. Thank you for listening to our conversation and for going on this journey with me. You can find the soundtrack to my therapist's life and all others on the Naked Man Spotify page. I'm working on uploading the podcast to YouTube, where the soundtracks will also find a home. Stay tuned. I found the act of listening to this much more bearable than I expected, far more bearable than the actual recording session itself, although I'm curious and terrified about what you all think. And, well, perhaps I feel better now because after this I exhaled, went on a hike, got back, yes, took an edible, and I worked until well past dinner. I came up with more ideas, more plans, and figured out some things on the forthcoming Patreon, which, yes, is coming on February 21st, aka everyone's favorite holiday, President's Day. I realize now this could all feel like a gimmicky promotion for the Patreon, but I'm not that clever or devious, I promise. This is just where I'm at in my life right now. And if you like where I'm at in my life, please rate and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell all your friends and therapists. If you want to join our community, follow us on Instagram at NakedManPod, and don't hesitate to reach out to us at nakedmanpod@gmail.com. Next time on the Naked Man podcast, after a mini hiatus, we start season 2 with conversations about online toxicity, online dating, and transitioning. In the meantime, as my dad always says, be sweet. This episode of the Naked Man Podcast was conceived by Andy Greene in collaboration with his therapist. The Naked Man is a podcast hosted, created, and produced by me, Andy Greene. All music was composed by Robert Panico, and all graphics were created by Christopher Miles.